Good morning, Veritas scientists. It's Monday, April 6th, 2020. Today in science, we're learning about the formation of sedimentary rock. So first, we'll do a little review of what we talked about last week, and then we'll get right into how sedimentary rock is formed. So to start, I'm going to take this ball of soil that I had from my yard. In here is organic matter, which we've talked about. There's some twigs. There's some other things that used to be alive, right? Decomposed plants and animals have made the organic matter that's in here, and a lot of this is inorganic matter. A lot of it is sand and clay and silt and other particles of things that were never ever alive before. Those are called inorganic matter. Go back to the lessons previous to this if you're not sure of what I mean by that. So what I want to show you here is when I break this big chunk of soil up, I'm going to put it in this cup of water, and we're going to let it settle while I'm doing the rest of this lesson, and we'll go back to this in a second. Whoop, so I'm just breaking it, dropping it in. Okay, making a big mess. I'll clean that up after. Okay, so I basically just dropped that in there, and we're gonna see what happens to all the different parts of the sediment, and we'll watch it in a little bit. We'll see what happened. Okay. So let's go back to last week. We learned a word called sediment. It's the tiny pieces of rock that break off of a larger rock through weathering and land in a body of water through erosion. So let me show you that. So we have a mountain here. That's Mount Tom. There's a big rock at the top. It's actually almost made up entirely of rock, which we'll get to eventually. But this giant piece of rock that's sticking out, the weather hits it. That's called weathering. The weathering breaks this rock into littler pieces. Those little pieces are called sediment. Okay, and erosion takes it. So when it rains, the water brings those little pieces of weathered rock, and they bring those pieces of sediment down into a body of water where they land. Now that's what we're trying to show here with this cup. That's just the sediment that landed in the cup. We're going to watch and see what happens with that. Okay, so we have this body of water, and now we have all this sediment that weathering broke it off of this rock, erosion took it down to this body of water, and then it all landed in the body of water. And what's going to happen is, since those little particles are heavy and this water's not moving like it is in a river, all these pieces of sediment are going to sink to the bottom. So they are all going to sink down, and they're going to land down at the bottom, at the floor of that body of water, and they are going to start piling up down here. So all these tiny little pieces of sediment are now stacking up or piling up at the bottom of this body of water. So the water's not moving much, it is just sitting here, so it all will sink down to the bottom. So now we have all of this sediment here at the bottom of this body of water. And it's going to sit there for a really, really, really long time. And we learned last week about how the weight of all this water is pressing down on it. Gravity is pulling down on this sediment that's sitting down here at the bottom. So it's going to take thousands of years. But after thousands of years, this sediment, which is just tiny little pieces of rock, right? Little pieces of basically sand and other small particles like silt and clay, those are all over time going to harden. It's going to take a really, really long time, but they are going to harden into layers that look kind of like that. So then more of it will come, and years later, more of that will layer up on top of it. More and more sediment will come down, and it will land here. So we had the red sediment at first. I'm using the red pen. Now we have some more sediment a couple years later, or many years later, is dropping down, and it's creating another layer of sediment. Okay, so what's happening here? Well, let's first look at this vocabulary. It says sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock is rock that is formed over thousands of years from the cementation of sediment. So the sediment is piling up here down at the bottom of this body of water, and it cements. So cementation was a word that we had last Thursday. It says when something hardens over time. So it becomes joined together and hardened as one. So the example I gave then was sedimentary rocks are formed over time through cementation. So that's what we're talking about here. So what's going to happen is the weight of everything that's above that sediment is pushing down on it, and it's eventually, over a really long period of time, is going to turn into rock. It is going to harden with all that pressure that's pressing down on it. It is actually going to harden into a rock. It's going to get pressed so tightly that it's actually going to turn into rock. Okay? So we had this sediment, and then years went past and more sediment fell, and now it's this black sediment. I'm doing that to try to show you how it's going to form layers, right? So we got all this sediment, and then years go by and more sediment keeps falling on it, and it's going to harden, it's going to cement, just like the cement we walk on outside is really hard, right? It used to be soft and then it gets hardened. Okay, so now we have another layer of sediment that hardens here. And this process keeps happening, right? Weathering breaks it, erosion takes the sediment down, it lands in this water, and now all the sediment is stacking up here. So what we end up with, over thousands and thousands of years, when it gets cemented, it all gets cemented into what's called sedimentary rock. It is made out of sediment. Okay? So it's going to harden. It's going to create rock down at the bottom of this body of water. Okay? And here is a piece of sedimentary rock. And I want to show you how the layers form just like this. This is how this rock was formed. And if you look at this sedimentary rock, I found this out. I think it was at Mount Tom, actually. So this is supposed to be Mount Tom. I found this there. So what this was, you can see the layers in it, right? The different colors. You can see how it's formed in layers. So this at one point was down at the bottom of a body of water, and all the little bits of sediment came down and hardened together to make this first layer. And then it happened longer and longer and longer, and we end up with another layer. And you can see all of the different layers going up the side of this rock, because that's how this really hard rock was formed over thousands and thousands of years, where those little layers of sediment hardened, and then the next layer fell on top of it, and then that hardened, and then the next layer fell on top of it, and that hardened. Then you end up with this rock with all these different layers of sediment that have now hardened. And I think that's the best way to see the different layers. It now hardened and is solid rock. Okay? So that's the first type of rock that we are learning about, is sedimentary rock. And it's formed at the bottom of a body of water over thousands of years through the cementation of sediment. And it all layers up and cements together, and that sediment now presses into this rock. Okay? Let's go to our question for today. This is what I'd like you to answer. Number 1 says, based on what you learned today about sedimentary rocks, why are fossils found inside of sedimentary rocks? Your response must use the following vocabulary. You should use the words sediment, cementation, weathering, and erosion in your response. Okay, so the question here, why are fossils found inside of sedimentary rocks? When they find fossils, they are often found inside of big sedimentary rocks. This is just a small piece of a sedimentary rock, right? These sedimentary rocks that form at the bottom of a body of water are giant, and they'll break off into smaller pieces like this, but they are big, big pieces of sedimentary rock. So my question is, why are fossils found inside of sedimentary rocks? And that is the question that we'll talk about tomorrow. Okay? So as I look over at my cup of water, it's still settling, but you could see when I first poured it in, it was extremely thick. Right? It was all brown. It looked like just complete dirt. And now you'll notice, it still hasn't, I haven't given it quite enough time. You'll notice that a lot of that sediment is already settled down here at the bottom. If you look at the bottom, all the brown there is settled down at the bottom of the cup. Okay, so there's still more, and I'm going to leave this cup, this exact cup, I'm not going to touch it, and we'll look at it first thing tomorrow. You'll see that the water here is actually starting to clear up a little bit, and the reason that that's happening is because all the sediment that was in there, that I dropped in there, is slowly settling down to the bottom. It's heavy, so it is, and the water's not moving here like it would be in a river. So all of this sediment is, after a little bit of time, gonna settle down and be on the bottom. And eventually that water is gonna be almost completely clear tomorrow because all the sediment will be down on the bottom. And that is how sedimentary rocks are formed, is that sediment falls down to the bottom and then hardens down there over thousands of years. That is all going to harden and turn into the layers that we see in this sedimentary rock here. All right, so we will continue learning about that tomorrow. I'll put this away somewhere where Charlie doesn't find it, and we'll talk about it then. All right, everybody, have a great day. See you tomorrow.